The 18th century sea was a place of profound danger. A person could fall from the rigging, be struck by a cannonball, or contract a fever that no one could name. For the men who chose a life of piracy during its so-called Golden Age, the risk of injury or sickness was a daily reality. The promise of plunder came with a high physical cost. Unlike naval vessels, which might carry a formally trained surgeon, a pirate ship sailed without the guarantee of professional medical care. Yet the crew still required someone to tend to wounds, set broken bones, and treat the myriad illnesses that spread in the close quarters below deck. This vital role fell to a figure often called the ship's doctor or surgeon. On a pirate vessel, the title of surgeon was less about formal education and more about a grim practicality. The primary medical challenges were traumatic injuries. A battle at sea produced a specific and brutal catalogue of wounds: splinters driven deep into flesh by flying wood, burns from cannon fire, and deep cuts from swords and axes. Infections followed swiftly in the damp, salt-laden air. Illnesses like scurvy, dysentery, and typhus were constant threats, their causes misunderstood by the medical science of the age. The standard treatments available to even licensed physicians on land were often as deadly as the diseases themselves, relying on bloodletting and toxic substances like mercury. The smell of sweat, gunpowder, and salt water filled the air, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked on every horizon. Given these horrors, one might assume a pirate crew would prize a trained doctor above all else. However, historical records tell a different story. A genuine surgeon with a university education was a rare and expensive commodity. Such men were far more likely to seek their fortunes in the cities or aboard wealthy merchant or naval ships, not among the rough democracy of a pirate crew. When a pirate ship did acquire a surgeon, it was often by coercion. A captured naval or merchant surgeon might be given the stark choice to join the pirates or be marooned. "You're either with us, or you're swimming with the fishes," a pirate captain might say, his voice low and menacing. More commonly, the role of ship's surgeon was filled by a volunteer from within the existing crew. This was not a sought-after position. The work was gruesome, the tools crude, and the outcomes uncertain. Failure could mean the death of a crewmate, a burden of guilt, or even blame from the crew. So who would take on such a grim duty? The answer often lay in a transferable skill set. Two roles aboard ship provided a man with the most relevant experience for dealing with the human body: the carpenter and the cook. A carpenter was accustomed to working with wood and metal, tools not so different from the saws and probes of surgery. He understood structure, joints, and repair. A cook, familiar with knives, animal anatomy, and the management of supplies, possessed a tactile, practical knowledge of flesh and the necessities of cleanliness. "I've seen my share of butchered meat," a cook might say, "but I never thought I'd be using those skills on a man." Thus, the pirate doctor was frequently a carpenter or cook who had stepped forward out of necessity. He would rely on a few basic medical texts, a chest of fearsome instruments, and whatever folk remedies were known among the sailors. His authority came from the crew's collective agreement, not from a diploma. This introduction to pirate medicine frames a world where professional care was a luxury. The following chapters will explore why these particular men were the ones to answer the call, what their makeshift medicine truly entailed, and how this system functioned within the unique social order of a pirate ship. It is a story not of trained healers, but of practical men facing impossible tasks with the only tools they had, their resourcefulness and bravery, in the face of overwhelming danger. The pirate ship was a place of brutal efficiency, where men were often forced to rely on unconventional means to survive. One of the most surprising aspects of pirate healthcare was the fact that most pirate doctors were actually carpenters or cooks. These individuals, who had no formal medical training, were responsible for treating the wounds and ailments of their fellow crew members. The reasons behind this phenomenon were largely practical. A cook, for example, had a unique set of skills that could be applied to medical care. He was familiar with the internal structure of animal carcasses, having butchered countless animals for food. This knowledge allowed him to set broken bones and even perform amputations. As the cook worked, the smell of salted meat and fresh blood filled the air, mingling with the sound of clanging pots and the murmur of the crew's conversations. The cook's hands moved with a practiced ease, his fingers stained with the remnants of his last meal. He worked with a focus that belied the chaos of the pirate ship, his eyes fixed on the task at hand. The carpenter, on the other hand, brought a different set of skills to the table. His experience with wood and tools allowed him to craft splints and other medical devices, which he used to treat the wounded crew members. The implications of this system were far-reaching. A carpenter-turned-doctor had no knowledge of infection, and as such, did not wash his hands or instruments between procedures. He used the same tar that sealed the deck planks to seal wounds, which often led to deadly infections. However, it's worth noting that even university-trained surgeons of the era were not much better, often operating with unwashed hands and dirty instruments. The difference between a carpenter and a surgeon in the 1700s was largely a matter of social class rather than medical outcome. "I've seen men die from infections that could have been prevented with a bit of soap and water," said one pirate, a grizzled old sailor with a missing eye. But what choice did we have? The carpenter and the cook were the only ones who could help us. Despite the limitations of their training, the cook and carpenter brought certain advantages to the table. The cook, for example, knew how to make medicine taste tolerable, often mixing bitter compounds with rum, sugar, or broth. He also had knowledge of folk medicine, passed down from cook to cook, which included the use of herbs and roots to reduce fever and stop diarrhea. The carpenter and cook also shared a critical trait. They were not afraid of blood. This emotional detachment was invaluable in the violent world of the pirate ship, where men often suffered gruesome injuries. "I've seen the cook saw through a man's leg like it was a piece of wood," said another pirate, a young man with a scar above his eyebrow. "He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. He just kept sawing until the job was done." There were exceptions, of course. Some pirate ships did capture legitimate surgeons who were forced to serve on board. However, these cases were rare, and most pirate crews relied on the carpenter and cook to provide medical care. The system was far from perfect, but it was the only one available. A pirate with a broken leg had two options: let the carpenter saw it off with a rusty blade, or let the wound fester until gangrene set in. Most chose the former, and while many still died, a few survived, owing their lives to men who had never read a medical book. In the brutal world of the pirate ship, this was the best medicine available. As one pirate said, "It wasn't pretty, but it was better than nothing, and sometimes it was enough to keep us alive." The pirates' reliance on the carpenter and cook was a testament to the resourcefulness and desperation of life on the high seas, where survival often depended on the ability to adapt and make do with limited resources. The medical chest on a pirate ship was rarely what anyone would call well-stocked. A few bottles of cheap wine, some dried herbs, a roll of linen bandages, and perhaps a single rusty saw. That was often the full extent of the medical supplies available to treat a crew of 80 or more men. When a pirate went down with a musket ball lodged in his thigh or a deep gash from a cutlass, the man called the doctor had to work with whatever he had. And more often than not, that man had never studied medicine a day in his life. The title of surgeon on a pirate ship was not earned through years of study at a university. It was given to whoever had the steadiest hands or the strongest stomach. Many pirate surgeons had learned their trade not in a hospital but in a carpenter's workshop or a ship's galley. A carpenter knew how to saw through wood, and that skill translated directly to amputating a shattered limb. A cook understood the basics of preserving meat and keeping wounds clean enough to prevent the worst infections. These men were not doctors in any formal sense, but they were the closest thing to one that a pirate crew could find. The medical chest itself was a grim collection of tools. A pirate surgeon might carry a few scalpels, a set of forceps for pulling teeth or musket balls, and a bone saw for amputations. The saw was often the same tool used by the ship's carpenter for cutting timber. There was no anesthesia beyond a bottle of rum and a leather strap to bite down on. The surgeon worked fast, because the patient would not stay still for long. A leg amputation had to be completed in under 2 minutes, or the risk of the patient dying from shock became almost certain. Supplies for treating illness were even more limited. A pirate ship might carry a small amount of cinchona bark for treating fevers, some mercury for syphilis, and a few dried herbs for stomach complaints. Most remedies were based on the humoral theory of medicine, which held that illness came from an imbalance of the four bodily fluids. The treatment for almost everything was bleeding, purging, or sweating. A pirate with a fever might be bled until he fainted, which often made him weaker rather than healthier. The most common medical problem on a pirate ship was infection. A small cut from a rope burn could turn into a festering wound within days. The surgeon would clean the wound with vinegar or wine, pack it with tar or turpentine, and hope for the best. If the wound turned black, amputation was the only option. The surgeon would give the patient a stick to bite on, pour rum over the wound and the saw blade, and cut through flesh, muscle, and bone as quickly as possible. The stump would be cauterized with a hot iron to stop the bleeding. Many men died from the shock alone. Disease was a constant threat. Scurvy killed more pirates than battles ever did. The surgeon knew that fresh fruit could prevent it, but fresh fruit was rarely available on long voyages. He would treat the symptoms with vinegar and hope the ship reached port before the crew's gums rotted away. Yellow fever, dysentery, and typhus swept through ships with terrifying speed. The surgeon could do little more than keep the sick men hydrated and isolated from the healthy ones. The pirate surgeon held a unique position in the crew. He was not subject to the same rules as other men. He did not have to fight in battles, and he received a share of the plunder equal to the captain's. This was not out of generosity. It was a practical decision. A good surgeon was worth his weight in gold, and the crew knew that their lives depended on his skills. If the surgeon died, the chances of surviving a serious wound dropped dramatically. The reality of pirate medicine was brutal and unsentimental. There were no miracle cures, no heroic rescues. There was only a man with a saw, a bottle of rum, and the desperate hope that he could cut fast enough to save a life. The pirate doctor was not a healer in the modern sense. He was a carpenter who knew how to remove a limb, or a cook who understood how to keep a wound from rotting. And that was often enough to keep a crew sailing for another day. The carpenter did not pretend to be a physician. He did what he knew how to do, and admitted when he did not know more. In an age of complex medical systems and specialized knowledge, there is something to learn from that honesty. The question is not whether pirate medicine was good or bad. The question is whether modern medicine, with all its resources, has kept the same willingness to adapt, to improvise, and to admit when it does not have all the answers. The pirates did not have a choice. Modern healthcare does. The legacy of the pirate doctor is not a technique. It is a reminder that the best medicine is the one that works in the moment, with the tools at hand, for the people who need it most. Consider a pirate ship in the year 1718. A man lies on the deck with a broken leg. The bone has pushed through the skin. The crew gathers around. There is no surgeon on board. The captain calls for the carpenter. The carpenter arrives with his tool chest. He looks at the leg. He has seen this kind of damage before, not in a person but in a ship. A mast that snapped in a storm. A hull plank that split under pressure. The principles are the same. He cleans the wound with rum because that is what they have. He sets the bone by feel, the same way he would align a cracked timber. He splints the leg with a piece of scrap wood and strips of canvas. The man screams. The carpenter does not stop. He works fast because the crew needs him back on deck. There is no time for sympathy. There is only the job. The cook had his own role. He watched the crew eat every day. He knew which men had stopped eating. He knew which ones had pale gums and loose teeth. Scurvy was a slow death. The cook could spot it weeks before the man complained. He would add lime juice to the ration when he could get it. He would serve sauerkraut from the barrel. He did not know about vitamin C. He knew that men who ate certain foods did not die as often. That was enough. The pirate system was crude, brutal, and often deadly. But it was also honest about its limitations. The carpenter did not pretend to be a physician. He did what he knew how to do, and admitted when he did not know more. In an age of complex medical systems and specialized knowledge, there is something to learn from that honesty. The question is not whether pirate medicine was good or bad. The question is whether modern medicine, with all its resources, has kept the same willingness to adapt, to improvise, and to admit when it does not have all the answers. The pirates did not have a choice. Modern healthcare does. The legacy of the pirate doctor is not a technique. It is a reminder that the best medicine is the one that works in the moment, with the tools at hand, for the people who need it most.